Get out. Find another table. This one's for family. Those were the words my son said to me at a restaurant, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. A moment later, a waiter placed a bill for $2,000 in front of me, as if it belonged there. I paid it calmly. What I did not know then was that the night was only beginning. The story you are about to hear is a work of fiction created by the Her Chains Channel team, based on real-life situations to convey lessons about family, emotions, and human values. All characters and events are illustrative. My name is Clara Bennett. Before that sentence was spoken out loud, before the laughter and the bill and the quiet stares, there was a phone call. My son called in the late afternoon, his voice careful in the way it always was when he wanted something to go smoothly. He told me he was celebrating a professional milestone and that the family was getting together for dinner. He said it would mean a lot if I came. Not warm, not affectionate, just necessary. I hesitated longer than he liked. I always did, but I agreed. Weeks earlier, when he mentioned the restaurant, I had been the one to call and secure the reservation. It was a place that liked advance notice, names, and reassurance. And I put my card on file the way I always had, just in case something went wrong. He said he would take care of everything. He always said that. The evening of the dinner, I dressed simply, nothing that would draw attention or invite comment. I arrived on time, as I had my whole life. When I saw my son already seated, leaning back with an ease I did not recognize, I felt a familiar tightening in my chest. He looked successful, confident, surrounded by people who seemed impressed by him. He stood when he saw me, smiled briefly, and gestured toward the table as if showing me where things were meant to be. It was not the center. It was not beside him. It was slightly off. A chair that felt borrowed rather than offered. I told myself not to overthink it. I reminded myself that I was there because he had asked. Because this was family. Because sometimes love meant accepting discomfort without comment. I stepped closer to the table, adjusting my bag, preparing to sit. That was when my son turned his head, glanced around the room, and spoke. My name was the reservation name. The staff treated me like the host because that's what the system showed. Mom, over here, my son said quickly, already half turned away. He reached for the back of a chair at the far end of the table and pulled it out just enough to make his point. Not beside him, not across. An edge seat. Angled slightly away from the others, I paused, then moved toward it. Just for tonight, he added under his breath. It's a tight table. I sat. Across from me sat his wife's parents. People I had met only a handful of times. To my left were two men in pressed jackets. Colleagues, I guessed. My son stood for a moment longer, scanning faces, checking reactions. When his eyes returned to me, they held a warning I recognized. Mom, he said lightly. Maybe don't bring up the house stuff. This is more of a celebration. I wasn't going to, I replied. He nodded, not listening. And keep it short. Okay. Some of them don't know you well. I smiled, small and contained. Of course. A woman across the table asked how long I'd lived in the area. I answered with a single sentence. My son cut in immediately. She downsized a while back. He said, really simplified things. I hadn't said anything about that. I let it go. When I reached for the menu, my son leaned closer. The specials are expensive, he murmured. Just so you know. I can read, I said quietly. He laughed, too loud. I know. Just helping. The words settled between us like a correction. Conversation moved around me. Over me. When I spoke, my son redirected. When I laughed, he watched the table. Each time I adjusted, he seemed relieved. I stayed still. I kept my voice level. I nodded when it made things easier. I told myself this was temporary, that the night would pass, that my role was to make it smooth. Then the waiter returned to take drink orders. And my son didn't look at me when he said, "We'll start with cocktails for the table." Not all tables were meant to hold everyone. I felt that truth settling in as the waiter moved on, pen hovering, waiting for the rest. The waiter had just finished placing menus when my son leaned closer, his smile still fixed for the table. "Mom," he said, not quietly, "this seat's not going to work." I looked up at him. "I'm fine here." He glanced around, then laughed. Like I'd missed a joke. "No, I mean, this table's for family." He tilted his head toward the others. "You can grab another table over there." The words landed heavier than he seemed to expect. He didn't lower his voice. He didn't soften it. Nearby tables went quiet for half a second. Then the sound rushed back in. One of the men across from me chuckled. "Awkward," he said, smiling into his glass. Someone else laughed louder. "She's got options," a woman added. "Plenty of seats. I stayed where I was." My hands rested in my lap, folded the way they always had when I was trying not to react. "I'm his mother," I said. My son's smile tightened. "Exactly. Let's not make this a thing." His wife shifted beside him, eyes fixed on her plate. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at him either. "Just for tonight," my son went on. Louder now. "This table's for family." The word echoed, strange and sharp. Family. I looked at the faces around me. People who had learned his name, his job title, his story. People who didn't know mine and didn't seem curious. I pushed my chair back slowly. No one stopped me. No one said my name. As I stood, my son finally met my eyes. There was impatience there. Relief. Maybe. He nodded toward an empty table nearby, as if giving directions. "Thanks for understanding," he said. Understanding. I picked up my bag and took 2 steps away from the table. Laughter swelled again behind me, louder this time. Freed from restraint, the conversation resumed like nothing had happened. I didn't leave the restaurant. I didn't move far. I stood beside the table, just long enough to hear my son say, "All right, let's order." As if I had never been there at all. I sat at a small table nearby, close enough to hear everything, far enough to make his point visible. Uninvited but unmoving. The waiter returned. He hesitated, glanced at my son, then at me. "Will you be dining with us this evening?" he asked carefully. My son answered before I could, "She'll be taken care of." I stayed silent. My throat felt tight, but my face didn't change. I told myself to breathe. I told myself this was only one moment. Then the first round of drinks arrived, and the table leaned in, already forgetting the sound of my chair scraping against the floor. Once I was no longer part of the conversation, the ordering changed. "Let's do another round," one of the men said. My son nodded immediately. "Absolutely." Someone suggested the chef's tasting menu. Another added a bottle recommendation without asking the price. Plates came and went, barely touched, replaced by new ones. No one looked in my direction. I sat quietly at the edge of the table, hands folded, listening. Put it all together. My son told the waiter, "1 bill." The waiter nodded and left. When he returned, he didn't stop in front of my son. He stepped past him and placed the folder gently in front of me. Centered, familiar, he met my eyes for just a moment. "Whenever you're ready," he said. The leather cover was warm from his hands. I opened it slowly. $2,000. No one reached for it. No one pretended to. My son didn't even glance down. He was laughing at something one of his colleagues had said, already moving on. "You've got that new client," someone remarked casually. "You can handle it." My son smiled. "She's good with this stuff. This stuff." I closed the folder and rested my hand on top of it. My name was still on the reservation. My card was still on file. It always had been. I waited. Not for help, not for acknowledgement, Nothing came. The waiter lingered a second longer, then stepped back, as if the matter had already been settled. I picked up the folder, steady, and slid my card inside. I didn't hesitate. When the waiter returned, I handed him my card and nodded once. "Thank you," I said. He looked relieved. "I'll be right back." Across the table, my son finally glanced down. "You didn't have to do that," he said, his tone light, almost amused. "I know," I replied. He opened his mouth as if to add something, then stopped. The conversation resumed without him, and he leaned back, satisfied. Someone raised a glass. Another laugh followed. The moment passed. While the waiter processed the payment, I stayed still. I kept my hands folded. I let the noise move around me. Inside, something quieter took shape. I thought of the paperwork I had signed years ago, sitting at my kitchen table with a pen that ran out of ink halfway through my name. I thought of the lease guarantee I'd agreed to when he said it was temporary, the business account I'd co-signed because the bank wanted reassurance, the line of credit that still listed my address, my phone number, my responsibility. I remembered how often he said, "It's just until things stabilize." The waiter returned and set the receipt in front of me. "Whenever you're ready," he said. I signed. I didn't look up. "See," my son said to the table. "Handled. Handled." I slid the receipt back and stood. My chair scraped softly against the floor. The sound cut through the laughter, just enough to be noticed. "I'm going to step outside," I said. My son waved a hand without turning. "We'll catch up later." I picked up my bag and moved away from the table. My pulse stayed even. The decision had already been made. Quietly and completely. I wasn't leaving because I was hurt. I was leaving because I understood what still belonged to me, and what I was no longer willing to carry. As I took a few steps toward the exit, a voice behind me spoke, measured and polite. "Just a moment, please, I stopped. The voice belonged to a man in a dark jacket, standing a few steps behind me. He held himself carefully, the way people do when they're about to correct something without causing a scene. "I'm the manager," he said, offering a small nod. "I just need to confirm something with you." My son turned in his chair. "Everything's fine," he said quickly. "We're all set." The manager didn't look at him. "The reservation and payment authorization are under your name, ma'am." He said to me, "You're listed as the primary account holder." "I know," I said. "There was also a request submitted earlier today," he continued. "A confirmation tied to this account." My son stood. "That was just routine," he said, smiling too tightly. "I told you I'd handle it." The manager's tone stayed even. "The request requires approval from the account holder. We weren't able to process it without her consent." I turned slightly, enough to see my son's face change. "What request?" I asked. He hesitated. "It's not a big deal." The manager glanced at his tablet. "It's a request to extend the authorization so this account can keep charging under your name," he said. "We were instructed to finalize it tonight." "I didn't instruct anyone," I said. The table had gone quiet. Chairs shifted. Someone cleared their throat. The manager closed the tablet. "I just wanted to make sure you were aware before anything moved forward." "I appreciate that," I said. My son opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time all evening, he didn't speak over me. "Thank you," I said again, meeting the manager's eyes. He nodded and stepped back. I didn't leave after that. I stayed where I was, standing beside the table. While the weight of what hadn't been said began to settle, my son cleared his throat. "We don't need to make this complicated," he said, trying to sound calm. "It's just paperwork." "It's not just paperwork," I said. The manager stepped closer, keeping his voice low. "The request was to extend billing privileges and confirm guarantor status for an associated account." My son cut in. "That account's mine. It's tied to her authorization." The manager replied, still not looking at him. The lease and the loan both reference the same guarantor. The words settled over the table. Guarantor. I reached into my bag and pulled out a slim folder I'd brought without thinking. Habit more than intention. It held copies I never threw away. Leases, addendums, letters with my name printed cleanly at the top. I signed because you asked me to. I said, opening it. You said it was temporary. My son shook his head. Mom, that was years ago. Yes, I said, and my name is still there. One of the men at the table leaned forward. You mean she backs the lease? The manager nodded once. And the business loan. Both require her approval for any changes. My son laughed, short and sharp. That's not how it works. It is, I said, because I never removed myself. Silence pressed in. His wife finally looked up, eyes moving between us. You didn't tell me that, she said. I didn't think it mattered. My son replied, she's always handled this stuff. Handled. I closed the folder. I handled it because I trusted you, I said, not because it stopped belonging to me. The manager spoke again. Without her confirmation, nothing moves forward tonight. My son's voice dropped. You wouldn't do that to me. I'm not doing anything. I said, I'm just not agreeing. One of his colleagues shifted uncomfortably. So the place, the business, that's all covered, my son snapped. It's covered. I met his eyes. He stared at me, searching for the version of me that would soften. It didn't appear. I need you to approve it, he said quietly. I shook my head. I need you to understand what you said to me tonight. He looked away first. The manager waited. I gave a small nod. Thank you for checking with me. He inclined his head and stepped back. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. The truth sat between us, printed and signed, heavier than anything I could have said. Around the table, no one laughed. The confidence my son had worn earlier slipped, replaced by something careful and unsure. As the weight of my name settled where it had always been, the laughter stopped first. Not all at once, but unevenly, like people realizing they'd missed a cue. Glasses were set down. Forks paused midair. Someone cleared their throat and didn't follow it with words. My son stared at the table. Not the menus, not the bill, just the empty space in front of him, as if it might offer direction. His shoulders, so relaxed earlier, had pulled inward. You should have told us, his wife said quietly. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't comfort either. I didn't think it mattered, he replied. No one responded to that. One of the men who had laughed earlier shifted in his seat. So, should we order dessert? He said, too quickly. No one answered. The manager stood a few steps away, hands folded, waiting without pressure. He didn't need to speak again. Everything that needed saying had already landed. My son finally looked up, just long enough to glance at me, then away. His mouth opened, then closed. Whatever he'd rehearsed didn't fit the room anymore. I stayed where I was. I didn't cross my arms. I didn't gather my things. I let the quiet do its work. Someone reached for their phone. Someone else pushed their chair back an inch, then stopped. The confidence that had filled the table earlier had thinned, leaving something careful behind. No one apologized. No one asked me to sit closer. The silence stretched, not awkward, just heavy. It pressed gently, insistently, until everyone felt it. I breathed in slowly and let it settle. Then I picked up my bag, the movement soft but deliberate, and stepped away from the table while no one tried to stop me. Mom, my son said it softly, as if lowering his voice might rewind the night. I turned halfway. I'm going home, I said. We can talk later, he replied. This doesn't have to end like this. I met his eyes for the first time since the manager stepped in. It already did. He frowned. You don't have to punish me. I'm not. I said, I'm stopping. He looked confused. Stopping what? I adjusted the strap of my bag. Fixing things before they break. Paying so no one feels uncomfortable. Explaining myself. His mouth opened, closed again. I'll transfer the money back, he said quickly. The dinner. I didn't mean I don't want it. I said, keep it. His face tightened. Then what do you want? I shook my head. I'm not asking for anything. The words seemed to unsettle him more than anger would have. I stepped away from the table. No one followed. No one called my name again. The waiter nodded as I passed, his expression neutral but aware. At the door, I paused long enough to steady my breath, not from fear, from relief. I didn't walk out feeling victorious. I walked out feeling finished. As I moved into the night, I let the decision settle fully. I wouldn't co-sign another document. I wouldn't cover another gap. I wouldn't stay silent to keep peace that only flowed one way. I left without asking to be invited back. He didn't call me directly after that night. Instead, there were messages passed along. A short text from his wife saying, "He's been under a lot of pressure." A voicemail left and deleted before I could listen. A suggestion, delivered carefully, that we could all reset if I wanted to. I didn't respond. A week later, my son finally tried. "I've been thinking," he said when I answered. Hey. His voice sounded measured, like he was choosing words the way he chose seats at that table. "We should keep things normal. I said. There was a pause. "So you're really stepping back?" "I already have," I replied. "I just didn't announce it." He exhaled. "You know I never meant to hurt you." "I know," I said, "and I also know what you meant to do." That was the end of the conversation. What surprised me wasn't the quiet that followed. It was how calm it felt. I still loved my son. I simply stopped confusing love with obligation. Here's what that night taught me, and I carry it gently. Not as a warning, but as a truth. Family is not proven by who you sit beside or who pays the bill. It's shown in how people treat you when there's nothing to gain. If this story stayed with you, take a moment to like it, leave a comment, or subscribe. Your support helps these stories reach others who might need them. I didn't lose my family that night. I found my footing, and I kept it.